What's going on, everyone? Wesley, Shoemaker, and Keenan Cummings back with another episode of the WVSports.com podcast. Backyard Brawl week is here, and we are just days away from West Virginia heading up to Pittsburgh to take on the Pitt Panthers in what is the 107th edition of the Backyard Brawl. Obviously, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably need no explanation on the importance of this game, but it goes beyond that, beyond the rivalry, I think, for this week, and we're obviously going to get into that, get into our picks for the game, and just things to kind of look out for this Saturday. So Pittsburgh, who they are as a team. Pitt has a 2-0 start to this season. They beat Kent State week 1 and then went on the road to beat Cincinnati in comeback fashion last week. Offensively, this is a very different team than the team that West Virginia saw last year. They want to go fast. They want to spread things out. They want to get the ball out quick. They want to be high tempo.
Tempo.
Think of it like Texas Tech. Think of it like a middle school band. Think
NASCAR.
of it like all of the above. Yeah, NASCAR. They want to go fast. They want to go fast. They want to go fast. Eli Holstein, he is their quarterback. He will be making his third start. I believe he's a transfer from Alabama. Don't quote me on that, but I believe I'm like 99% right. Transfer from Alabama last week against Cincinnati, 20-35, 302 yards, an interception, and 2 sacks. The week before, he had 3 touchdown passes and almost over 300 yards through the air again. He's also ran a couple times. But the big guy on Pitt's offense is Desmond Reed. He's their do-it-all kind of guy. He can do it on the ground. He can do it receiving the ball. He can do it returning the ball. He's a shorter guy, but he really has some electricity in him. New OC, new players on offense, and that's kind of who they are on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, it's a similar deal to what you've seen in the past from this Pitt team. They want to get after the quarterback. They want to challenge you, especially in man coverage at times on the outside. Donovan McMillan, he's a guy who has 19 total tackles and an interception. Obviously, on the defensive line, they have multiple guys who have multiple TFLs and sacks this year as well. Brandon George, Rasheem Biles, Kyle Lewis, those are some. And opponents are only 31% on third down against this Pitt defense this year. Special teams, their kicker, I believe he's 5 for 5 on kicks this year. I think he's made 2 kicks from 50+. So that's
and a game winner.
Yep. And so that's some serious strength at that position as well. So we know it's going to be fun. Keenan, you're obviously going to be there. So what are your overall thoughts on the Backyard Brawl and what you expect from Pitt this weekend?
Like you said in the lead, Wes, it's a completely different Pitt team. Throw out what you've seen the last 2 years. It's no longer pro style. It's very much spread, wide open. Get up to the line, snap it. I watched their game against Cincinnati, a lot of that game before I head over to the stadium last week for the Albany game. And, it's just different. You weren't fearing that Pitt offense. Even in 2022, when they won the game, a lot of it was kind of mistakes West Virginia made. It wasn't necessarily, you weren't blown away by what Pitt was doing offensively, but this is a team that, it's not complicated, but they get up, they're good at what they do, and they run their plays, and they get guys in space. A lot of wide splits at the wide receiver spot. They like to run the ball with Reed, who's just dynamic. He's one of those guys that a lot of people have written off because of his height, but he's explosive. You get the guy the football in a lot of different ways, and he can make things happen. They have good receivers. They had good receivers last year. I think they just weren't used. Kenny Johnson is a guy West Virginia recruited. Mumfield's a guy West Virginia recruited. They have some other guys as well, a couple transfers in from Western Carolina, which is where Cade Bell, their offensive coordinator, is from. So it's a pretty good team.
Has $179 on 10 catches and 3 touchdhdowns.
And he was their guy last week. When they were trying to come back, they kept finding him. He made some big catches for them, and I think that he made some big catches against West Virginia a couple years ago as well. So I think that he's a guy to watch for them. Kenny Johnson's explosive athlete, and that Gavin Bartholomew somehow still has eligibility at the tight end spot. He's a very good tight end for them. So it's a pretty good offensive unit. Defensively they are what they are. We know what they do. It's what Narduzzi's done since he's been there. They're going to blitz. They're going to play. They're going to try to cause havoc up front. A lot of moves, stunts, all this different things that they're going to do to cause confusion. And then they're going to man you up on the outside. I think personally that's where West Virginia needs to show growth. They need to win those outside battles with their wide receivers. They've talked about it all offseason. Press us. Play man coverage on us. We'll see. Well, we're going to find out because Pitt's going to do that. It would be downright shocking if they didn't. That's kind of the way they play defense. So We'll find out. We'll find out if it was talk or if West Virginia's going to be prepared, because I think they're going to have to win those matchups. Pitt's pretty good at stopping the run, usually. I think that they know West Virginia's going to try to run the ball, so it's going to be weakness on weakness in a sense. But, that's what West Virginia spent the whole offseason dedicating on, is Garrett Green getting more accurate, wide receivers winning those battles. So if those two things can happen, West Virginia's going to be able to score. If they don't happen, it's going to get interesting.
Yeah, I think for West Virginia, though, the offensive line is going to play huge, right?
Yeah.
Because they've really played well through the first 2 weeks of the season. They're obviously a veteran group, and this is a game where you want to hold the ball. You don't want to have these up and down, momentum swing type of scores. You want to be able to control the game. You want to be able to kind of have your bread and butter of running the ball. But as you said, Keenan, Pitt's pretty good at stopping the run. So how can you beat them elsewhere? I think a guy like Cole Taylor is going to be a big, big X factor, right? He can kind of make those matchups crazy for opposing defensive coordinators, but we've kind of said that about him and every other opponent that West Virginia's faced. It's more of a matter of, can they actually utilize him? He obviously had the touchdown last week against Albany, but for me, he's a guy that has to produce. And then obviously, as you said, that wide receiver room, they've just got to show up. It's put up or shut up time, I think, for them. I think it's also put up or shut up time for Garrett Green. He bounced back in a big way last week. I think he completed almost 75% of his passes, which is a great number. I don't expect him to be at that number, but I do expect him to have a better performance than Penn State week 1. And truthfully, he must have a better performance than he did against Penn State week 1.
Yeah, I don't think it's possible for him to play that bad again. I think he was just too amped up, just looked off, but looked much more like the Garrett that everybody's come to know, here at West Virginia last week. And yes, I know it's Albany, FCS team, but he made the plays, he made the throws, and he used his legs a lot more, got outside the pocket. We talked about that in our recap, but I think that as long as Garrett plays the way that Garrett can and those around him help him out, this offense is going to score points. They're not nearly as bad as they looked week 1, and they might not be as good as they looked last week, but as long as they find a happy medium in there, yep, I think that this team's going to score points and they're going to be able to compete with most teams on their schedule. So that's what you got to shoot for.
Flip side of things, though, I think there's some areas of concern, because when we've seen this West Virginia team play a Texas Tech team, which is a similar, just wants to get to the line and go, go, go. I know a couple years ago when they went to Lubbock, it was a real big problem for that defense. And obviously there's been some question marks, especially with the secondary through the first 2 weeks of the season. And obviously you're without Eddie V on the defensive line. How can you kind of put pressure on Eli Holstein, who he's still very young as a starting quarterback. And so if you're West Virginia and you can kind of get to him, ring his bell once, or at least just get him on the ground, get his feet moving, then you really kind of can help your defense settle in and maybe make the moment a little too big, make things speed up for him. But if you're going to leave him where he can set his feet, make throws, and kind of start picking things apart, and then they get to the line quickly, I think that definitely favors Pitt, especially with the way the secondary has played the last 2 weeks for West Virginia. And I think right now we're kind of in a wait-and-see mode with the secondary of, until they can show us that they can consistently produce, we have to expect that they won't consistently produce. At least that's where I'm at.
Yeah, it depends. It's going to be interesting to see how Pitt attacks the defense. I could see them trying to get the ball out fast, trying to get in a rhythm because they want to get first downs. But if they drop back to throw it, West Virginia's got to find a way to get pressure on them. This have to. A lot of people have picked at the secondary a lot, but the pass rushes, they work in tandem. And West Virginia has not had that great of a pass rush. If you take TJ Jackson out of the equation, at times it seemed non-existent. So you got to be able to generate a little bit of a pass rush.
But his role will be increasing now, obviously.
Yeah, it will. And Cincinnati was able to do that a few times last week, and it forced Holstein in some really bad throws. So you can tell, he's a very talented player. Where I've been impressed with him is his ability to step around in the pocket and make plays happen, extending plays, make plays with his feet. That's what I think really stood out to me in that Cincinnati game. But he's still a young quarterback. He can be flustered, and West Virginia's got to take advantage of that. You have an advantage at quarterback any way you slice it. You have a redshirt senior, they have a redshirt freshman. In terms of experience, in terms of these type of moments, you got to win. It's kind of like we talked about week 1. You got to win that position, and you can't let a redshirt freshman kind of have his way. And West Virginia's going to have to play better in the secondary. That starts at the corners. In the safeties, they've got to play. They got to play the ball better. They got to use better technique. Those guys dropping. If they play zone, you got to get in your right spot. Stop looking in the backfield. And with tempo, you going back to tempo. West Virginia's seen it before. It's always a talking point anytime you play a tempo team, but this isn't nothing new for West Virginia. They've played tempo before. It's about getting lined up, making it simple, getting lined up, and then tackling and playing football. It's not that complicated. Tempo only works if you get first downs. It looks pretty silly. You go 3 and out and have to punt in 14 seconds. So you got to be able to win first down. It's a big down. You can really stop tempo if you're able to stop them on first down, because then it kind of causes them to think a little bit, and you're not going to run out. You're not going to lose 5 yards on first down, run up to the line, and run a play again. So you got to stop the forward momentum there, and if you do that, I think West Virginia's defense should be okay. Pass coverage is a concern. No one here is trying to argue it isn't, but also pass rush. Those two need to be working in unison, and if they are, then this defense can take a step, because I've been pretty pleased, in terms of run defense so far. I think that it's been solid. I know Penn State kind of creased them 2 times in that one in the first game, but it's been pretty solid for the most part. But, you got to get better on the back end, because even if it isn't a major factor this week, it's definitely going to be moving forward.
Yeah. So let's move on and just kind of pivot a little bit to the West Virginia side of things. We've obviously talked right now about who Pitt is, but just this game in general for West Virginia, I think we both agree that this is as must-win as a must-win gets for the Mountaineers. I just think that you're in a spot where you have, on paper, the better team. As you said, Keenan, West Virginia has the better quarterback. They have the more experienced quarterback. You kind of have to use it. But also, you just can't have a repeat of 2022. And I know you mentioned that to me off air, but if this team, which we've heard nonstop throughout the offseason, and I get we're 3 weeks in, 2.5 weeks in, but they've talked about where they want to go. You have to win these games. I know it's a rivalry game, and I know things get chaotic, and I know things get crazy, and I know it's hard sometimes to go on the road and win rivalry games, but this is one that I think we both fully agree West Virginia has to have, and there's no way around it.
Yeah, and I mean, not just for simply, outcome of the season. I think that this game probably, if we're going to be honest with each other, outcome of the season, I'm not sure this game is as important as what comes ahead. To the fan base, absolutely. This is a game you need to win. 2022 still stings to the fan base. You still see people talk about it on the message boards. You still see people referencing it. It's a game that haunts people, and I think it's in full transparency. I think if you were listening to Neil Brown, he even acknowledged, it's something that still is a sore spot for him. It's a game that West Virginia should have won, and they let it slip away. And letting a game slip away hurts. Letting a game slip away against your biggest rival, one that you hadn't played in a decade, and means more to the fan base than any other game on the schedule, hurts. So there's no way of sugarcoating this. This is a monumental game for West Virginia and for Neil Brown. It sounds silly to boil things down game to game to game. And like I said, in terms of the football coaches, it's another game. The football team, it's another game. The fan base and the reaction.
This is the game.
You're going to a lot. It's more leeway. This game, you head into Kansas 1-2, and it's going to be a grumble city, to put it lightly. I think people are not going to be happy, and I think in a sense, Neil Brown and this coaching staff, they said this was their most talented football team. Talented football teams can go on the road and even beat their rivals as favorites.
Also, just let's draw parallels where they are. 2 years ago, West Virginia opened the season against Pitt. The next week, at home against Kansas in the Big 12 opener. 2 years later, week 3, on the road against Pitt. Next week, Big 12 opener at home against Kansas. So you could kind of redeem yourself if you're Neil Brown and company big time, right? You have the exact same opportunity staring you in the face that you had 2 years ago. First one against Pitt last time, you just kind of gave it away. Obviously, the pick six that everyone remembers. Then the next week, you gave it away in overtime. So this is to me at least, this is the perfect opportunity to say, you know what? This is how we show we are a better football team. We are put in the exact same position that we were 2 years ago, and that was the result then, and this is the result now.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I'd never even thought about that. I've written about it a lot and never even thought about the parallels, but it's true. And it's just, you got to kind of measure it because, we're not in the weeds like the fans are. My emotions are not swinging from play to play. I've been there. I understand that. I'm a fan of of an NFL team as well. I understand that. I did not have a good Sunday last week, but at the same time, like, I get it. Like, I get people's frustrations. It is year 6, and Neil has built this thing the right way. I think he's done a lot of things right. Now it's time to prove it right on the field. And this game's monumental for West Virginia's fan base. It's going to be every year, especially when you're not conference teams. As weird as that sounds, it almost seems more important because it's earlier in the season and it sets the tone. This has become the new barometer in a sense to me. The new Maryland. It used to be Maryland was kind of the measuring stick for West Virginia. Right now, as long as this game is played, and we'll get into this more here in a minute about the series, but as long as this game is played, I think this is a barometer for West Virginia, and it's a game you need to win, even on the road.
Let's get into it now. Obviously, before anything else happens, there's this game, but going forward, there is some series lined up between these two teams later on. There is a little break in the series, obviously. West Virginia has voiced their support for this game. Neil Brown has been very public and open that he wants this game played. I think he wants it played from just a feasibility standpoint of it's the easiest road trip they will probably have ever because it's so close. Because logistically speaking, they're not hopping on a plane. They're not having to do anything but get on a bus ride, go up north and play, or vice versa. Pitt gets on a bus, comes down south and play. And so feasibility, that's one thing, but also he does recognize the significance of this game. I think it was that game 2 years ago when he hopped on that video on the Sunday or Saturday and said, we've got to be better. So he knows really, really deep down what this means to the program, what this means to the fans. He knows the history of the game. He's been really good in that aspect of always embracing the history and culture of this football program. And so he knows. So I think, personally speaking, for me, this game should be played every year. Both teams want to play it. Fans love it. Like, what's saying no in that sense? And so if you can get a rivalry game on the schedule, make fans happy, but also keep it easy when there's the ACC stretching into California and the Big 12 stretching into Utah, right? Like, that makes it easier on the lives of players for both teams as well. So I'm all for it.
Oh, it needs to be played. No question. There's just a different feeling around Morgantown last year for that game. The only thing I can describe that was close to it since I've been on the beat, LSU just a little bit because it was LSU and they come into Morgantown, Penn State this year, but that was for different reasons. But just like look at that Pitt team last year and look at West Virginia's team. And that had the buzz of, any Big 12 game sans that Oklahoma game when they were playing for a potential conference title, really since I've been here. Maybe the Baylor, the first Big 12 game. And that's no knock on the Big 12. I think they've been a good fit for West Virginia, but there's a lot of history. There's a lot of proximity. There's a lot of tradition. And you mentioned Neil Brown, he got caught on camera or whatever, the first matchup, saying there's a lot of hype around the game. He's learned that now. He's learned, he understands that, why there's so much hype and why people care about it. The one gripe I have about this, I hope that they're able to make this work out. I hope that this is an annual game. I do hope it gets kicked to rivalry week. There are ACC teams that already do this. Clemson, South Carolina, Florida, yeah. Florida State. There's teams that already do this, so it can be done. I hope that West Virginia Pitt, if they're not in the same league, which is ridiculous that they're not, that's a whole different discussion. We could spend 4 hours talking about that, but I hope that it is played then, when I was growing up, when I was a student, even when I was a kid, there were a couple of September games, but most of them were in November. It's kind of what you just got used to. It was Pitt week and you roll from there. And I think that it's good for college football. It's good for both programs in a time where it's harder and harder to get people to come to games, harder to get people more interested. What are Pitt fans care about? Cal and Stanford and SMU or West Virginia? And same thing with West Virginia. And it just makes sense and it needs to be played. And I'm glad to hear Neil say that like when you're looking at their schedule, they want to play Pitt, a group of 5, and an FCS. And if you get three games, that's about perfect for me. No offense to those fans that would rather play Virginia Tech or, some of those other things. I understand that. Trust me, I do understand that. I'm from Hurricane, so I'm actually closer to that area than up here. But I do think if you had to pick one, you're going to pick the game that you've played the most and really has been the rivalry for West Virginia.
Yeah, and I think Janil's point about the scheduling aspect of it, I think it's okay also to have once every 4 years you have a Maryland, you have
Yep.
a Virginia Tech, you have a Penn State in addition to the Pitt school. Because, I mean, we've seen it for the last 4 years here where it's been 11 Power 5 games on the West Virginia schedule. So it is doable.
Just don't double up the 2 road games. Just don't play
Yeah.
2 Power 5 road games. That's where they've made mistakes.
Correct. Let's go to keys to victory, shall we? I'll go first with one, and then you bounce back with one. We'll kind of do a little snake here. So for me, it's going to start and end with Garrett Green. I know we touched on it earlier, but also I've hit this point a billion times every time we've talked about Pitt, and I get to finally do it once more. Is Garrett Green didn't get to play in this game last year, and I think that's a really big deal. I think it's with how emotional he is as a football player and how much he has shown his love and appreciation for this university and state in West Virginia. Like, he wants to play in this game, and it was taken away from him because he got hurt so early on last year. Obviously, 2 years ago, that was JT Daniels, so he wasn't not playing, but I just think he's kind of itching. And so for me, we saw him itching for the Penn State game, and it wasn't good. And so how does he control that emotion? How does he kind of rein it in? Because there's going to be a lot of Pitt fans there, but there's also going to be a lot of West Virginia fans there. So it's going to be a great environment. It always is. But for me, he didn't play in this game last year when he was supposed to. How does he respond this year? Does he try to do too much early, or does he kind of let the game come to him? If he lets the game come to him, do his thing on the ground, through the air, which it was good that they used his legs a lot more, I think, against Albany. They'll have to do that again going forward. But it's how does he respond when he's kind of itching to get going when he didn't get to play in this game last year?
We've touched on some of my points, so I'm not gonna regurgitate them to you all. I mean, I think that West Virginia's got to win on the outside. I think that they've got to be able to generate pressure. They can't have busted coverages, that kind of deal. But for me, it's a simple thing in this game. It's a rivalry game. There's a lot of emotions. Just play good football. Don't have a lot of pre-snap penalties. Don't turn the ball over. Score touchdowns.
3 fumbled snaps, right?
Yes, don't fumble snaps. Just play good, efficient football. Make tackles in open space. And I think if West Virginia does that, they have the better football team on paper. Now, paper doesn't mean much, but they have the better football team on paper, and I think if they do that, they'll take care of business.
So let's do a prediction then, shall we? I'll go first here.
Oh, look at that. You're jumping into the waters.
I'm jumping into the waters. I just think this is a game. I just think it's one West Virginia gets. I don't know why, really, besides the fact that I think they're the better team. And I think that they've kind of rallied in the past week. I think that Albany performance, especially on the offensive side, was really positive. Scoring touchdowns on 7 drives and scoring on 7 of 9 drives total. Like, that's really good. And I think this offense is kind of going to drive this team until the defense can kind of step up. And so that's why I just think they're senior led on that offensive side. Offensive line's good. Running backs are good. CJ Donaldson loved playing at this stadium 2 years ago, I'll tell you that. So I'm going to say West Virginia wins. I think both teams do score a good amount of points, but I'm going to say 34-30 West Virginia in a close one. I'm not sure if it's close as in Pitt has a chance to win late or if they kind of make it close late, but I think 34-30 West Virginia in a close one.
I'm with you. I think it's a back and forth game. I think that both these teams are going to score points. But West Virginia's going to win it. I'm already locked in. I got to pick them the next 2 weeks. Spoiler alert.
You do, because 2 weeks ago you said they're going to win the next 3.
Well, I mean, if they do lose this one, I think I'm out of it. I think I'm already wrong. But
yes,
I do think that they're going to win this game. Pitt is a better football team than I thought they would be to start the year. I have to give them a lot of credit. Watching them last week, yes, they looked really sloppy in the first half, but they rallied and made plays. They're always solid defensively. That game could have got away from them very early. But the defense rose up, made stops in the red zone, made Cincinnati kick field goals, kept it close. And then when the offense found their rhythm, they were able to score just enough to win that game. And I think that, that could be a rallying cry for them moving forward, going to give them a lot of confidence. But I like this West Virginia team. I know that they were bad against Penn State. Throw that out. I think that this is a better football team than they said or they showed. And I hope they are because I have written about it and believe that they are. The coaching staff has done the same. I think most people agree that they're a better football team than they showed. I think it's going to be a very close game. I see it high scoring like you. I could see 38-35, 38-31, something to that degree. But I think West Virginia makes just enough plays to get out of Acrisure with the win.
Well, we are not done here. If you've made it this far, we do have an interview with Jim Hammett of PantherLair.com, which is the
Definitely
Pitt.
worth the listen.
It is. He's great. He's from the Pitt Rival site, so we do hope that you continue on listening. But if you don't, or if you just made it this far and you just wanted to hear us talk, selfishly we'll say thank you. But we do wish that you keep on listening. But kickoff is at 3:30, I believe ESPN2. Keenan will be there with live coverage for us. And then obviously we will have everything from now, which is Wednesday evening, heading up into the Saturday, and then Saturday night and into Sunday and Monday. It is our pleasure to be joined by Jim Hammett of PantherLair.com of the Rival Sports Network, who covers Pitt football. And he is an expert on Pitt. We are obviously not the experts on Pitt, but who better to bring in and talk about Pitt than the expert himself. So, Jim, just kind of your overall thoughts on Pitt's start to the season. Obviously, they're 2-0 start. Obviously, the offense, Eli Holstein kind of got things going at the quarterback position. Desmond Reed there as well. So what has been your general takeaways from Pitt's start 2 weeks into this thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think going into this season and just the talk all offseason was about seeing Pitt's improved offense. And, obviously last year they struggled quite a bit. Frank Signetti Jr. as the offensive coordinator, Phil Dracovic as the quarterback. And obviously they needed some new life. So what Pat Narduzzi did was he went out and hired Cade Bell. And so through 2 games, we're starting to see a lot better offense, out of Pitt this year. I mean, they're able to move the ball. The quarterback play is significantly better. So, looking at that first game, it was Kent State. I mean, they kind of took care of business, kind of did what they were supposed to do. I don't think it was a surprise that Pitt beat Cincinnati. I just don't know if they needed their largest comeback in 49 years to do it. So it was a little bit surprising on that end, but I think the overall takeaway from that game is that they could score quickly, and they scored a bunch of points in the fourth quarter when it mattered.
Has that transition on offense? I mean, that's quite a shift, from what Signetti was doing to what they're doing now. Has that gone about as smoothly as they could have anticipated?
Yeah, I think it has, and I think a lot of it is, he brought 3 playmakers with him from Western Carolina, and there's a little bit of question marks. Are these guys big enough? Are they going to handle the FBS level? But it seems like they can, and I think having guys like that have made that transition easier. So, 2 games into this thing, arguably Pitt's best player so far has been Desmond Reed, a transfer from Western Carolina. He's actually leading the country in all-purpose yardage. He's been just a big play waiting to happen. So I think having guys like that have really made it easier. And, even going back, I mean, Pitt was 3-9 last year, but I thought they had a couple good weapons, and they were just underutilized because of the poor quarterback play. So, Konate Mumfield's been around. He's a good player. Gavin Bartholomew's been the tight end at Pitt for, this is his 4th year as a starter. So I think just a combination of, bringing in some new faces that are familiar with the offense has helped kind of the older players just grasp it a lot quicker.
As far as the offense goes and it being new, just because there's been a lot of success, it feels like in the last 2 weeks from Pitt, success that really we didn't see last year. Do you think it's been more of the opponents they've played, or just that this is a new look offense and it's been successful being implemented?
Yeah, I mean, I think a little bit like that first week. I mean, you can take what you can when you play a MAC team, but I think last week I saw some good things. Just being down on the road in Cincinnati, it's just they were down 21 points and they didn't really blink. And I think it has a lot to do with the scheme. I mean, because you have a redshirt freshman quarterback, you're still kind of wondering what he can do, but he was put in position to make good plays. I mean, he made the plays, but he was also, they were kind of schemed up for him. And, a lot of them were, dump it across the middle and give it to your fastest player, and he outruns the defense for 56 yards. So, I mean, I think what this offense does and what Cade Bell does as a play caller is he puts his team in good positions. And I think that's just kind of been the biggest difference so far between last year and this year.
West Virginia plays in the Big 12. Obviously, they've seen this a lot, but the word they keep hearing, down here is tempo, tempo, tempo. How fast is Pitt going? And on top of that, how do they utilize Reed? How do they move him around a lot? How do they get him the football?
Yeah, I mean, they are snapping the ball quickly. And I think if anything, if any part of the team that has had the biggest adjustment, it's probably the offensive line, because I think the skill players have been able to pick up on it quicker. But I mean, this is an offensive line that was recruited to play kind of that pro style running game football, and they have to kind of get used to, running up to the line. If they break off a 30-yard play, they have to get up the line because they do snap it quickly. So I think when it's cooking, whenever it's working, like they always say their goal is to run a play every 7 seconds if they can. So I mean that's kind of the warp speed that they're going at. But to touch on what you said about Reed, they do line him up everywhere. Last week he was the first Pitt player ever to have a 100-yard rushing game and a 100-yard receiving game in the same game. I mean they were able to utilize him in different ways. He has 3 touchdowns this year. All of them have been over 46 yards. He has a rushing touchdown, a receiving touchdown, and a return touchdown. So yeah, they can get him in different ways. I mean, whenever you see him on the field, come Saturday, like he is small. I mean, he's a tiny dude, but he plays hard and he's finished both of these games very well. So yeah, they can move him around, and the goal is just get him the ball at this point. I mean, he's been that explosive.
West Virginia's had a lot of guys like that in the past. Those smaller guys that people kind of write off that have had a lot of success. So West Virginia fans are used to that.
Yeah, I think they probably think of Tavon, right? But on the defensive side of the ball for Pitt, what are some areas of concern there for either you or for Pitt's program in general that you think West Virginia might be able to kind of attack and expose this weekend?
Yeah, I think there's probably 2 areas where they're going to try to expose. I mean, I am pretty sure West Virginia is going to try to run the ball. I think C.J. Donaldson has had it 100 yards in the past 2 backyard brawls. So I think they're going to try to establish him, and they're going to try to attack Pitt up front. I mean, Pitt has virtually a brand new defensive line this year, and it starts. They lost their really well-regarded defensive line coach Charlie Partridge. They lost a couple players in the portal, and what they have had to do is go out and get guys in the portal. So they're still trying to find their way. There's still a pretty big rotation, as far as defensive tackles go, and trying to find those right combinations. So Cincinnati was able to break off a couple, big gains. Corey Kiner, I think, went up, had 100 yards. So I think until they prove they can stop the run, teams are going to go at them. And obviously the other area is, cornerback. I mean, Cincinnati was able to get some deep passes on Pitt, and that's kind of the book on Pitt in general. I mean, they play so aggressive in the front 7 that those cornerbacks can be on islands right now. And, both starting quarterbacks, this is their first year as a starter. So, yeah, I mean, I think, you're going to have those isolated matchups where you're going to try to, you're going to see West Virginia try to go right at Pitt corners and also, try to get them in the run.
I know there was a lot of personnel turnover with Pitt on defense, but was there kind of a calming factor, just a sense that, this is kind of not what Narduzzi does, and, he's had a lot of success even with turnover in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I think in some regards, there's so much change on the offense, but like there's still kind of that belief within the program that they're just going to do what they do. There's been a couple of years now they've had some really good safety play, and I think that's one of the strengths again this year. Donovan McMillan, Javon McIntyre, but you go back the 2 safeties before them, Eric Hallett and Brandon Hill both got drafted. The 2 guys before them, DeMar Hamlin got drafted, and obviously Paris Ford was a really good player in college. So they've always just kind of kept the line moving as far as safeties go. They're pretty excited about their linebackers. They have a lot of young up and coming. They're all sophomores, athletic. So I think there was a kind of a thought that they might struggle at the beginning of the year, and this might be the time to get them. But by the end of the year, it's gonna look like that standard Pat Narduzzi defense with a lot of pressure and a lot of sacks.
Kind of jumping off topic of the on the field part of this. Obviously, West Virginia coaching staff has come out, especially Neil Brown this week, and said this is a game they want to play. There's obviously future series lined up between these 2 teams, and this rivalry goes way back. But is that same sentiment shared by Pitt? And then obviously for you personally, do you think these 2 teams should play every single year?
I think it's a good thing that they play. Just seeing the atmosphere at the past 2 games. I was in Morgantown last year and obviously in Pittsburgh 2 years ago, and both crowds were great. I think that the one in Pittsburgh, College Game Day, was there. I mean, there's a lot of hype around this game. So whenever you look at college football these days, everything's changing. So it's nice to kind of have those constants. It's nice to have a backyard brawl like this, like a big game. So I do think there's interest on Pitt's side to keep it going. I mean, obviously, West Virginia is in a very similar position. It's Pitt's biggest rivals aren't always on the schedule every year. They aren't in the same conference. I mean, it's the same thing with the backyard brawl as it is with Pitt Penn State. I mean, it comes and goes, and obviously people want to see those games. The crowds are great. It gets everyone excited. So I think it's more likely that Pitt and West Virginia are going to iron that out and play more often than Pitt and Penn State. And I think everyone's receptive to it. It's been great. It's just been a great showcase for both programs.
The last 2 years, both, up in Pittsburgh and in Morgantown last year, there's been a lot of buzz, a lot of excitement, a lot of buildup throughout the week. Are you already starting to kind of feel that, around Pittsburgh and just the lead up to this game?
Oh, absolutely. You could feel it on the message boards. You could feel it on Twitter. You could feel it when you're talking to the team. I mean, they know it's a big game. I think that first year, when Pitt West Virginia played, it was the season opener. So I think, everyone was just kind of gearing up for the season, and like they were told like, hey, like this is a really big rivalry. And I don't think they quite understood it. I don't think the players understood. I don't even think probably Neil Brown and Pat Narduzzi didn't quite understand it at first, but then they probably walked out on the field and looked in the stands and saw what it was like. So I think there's just a better understanding from the football point of view, just from the team. It's like, okay, like our fans really, really care about this game, so we should too.
One more thing from me here, and then Keenan, I'm not sure if you have anything else, but keys to victory for Pitt. If I told you right now Pitt wins because, and then what would those reasons be? And then give us a prediction of yours for Saturday, if you would.
I think in order for Pitt to win, they can't just wait until the fourth quarter, third quarter to kind of get the offense rolling. They need to be a little more efficient there. So, I mean, I think the biggest key to the game is Eli Holstein for Pitt. I mean, he's a young quarterback, but he's really talented. And if he can kind of put it together, kind of keep the chains moving, then I think Pitt has a really good chance. I mean, I kind of said in my behind NMB lines pick that I could feel this kind of feels more to me like the 2022 game where it was back and forth, emotion swings, big play after big play. Last year's game was boring. I mean, it wasn't even fun to watch. So I think it's going to resemble that. And, because of that, because West Virginia has a senior quarterback, as opposed to Pitt's freshman quarterback, I'm kind of putting the edge towards West Virginia, but I don't know. I mean, I've seen the line jump from 3 to 1.5 to 2. So it's kind of been that kind of game, but I'm saying West Virginia in a close one, but I mean, just knowing how this game is, it could really go either way.
Yeah,
well,
I was going to say, I kind of feel it's the exact same way. I think that this is going to be a really close game, probably come down to turnovers or which team makes the most mistakes.
Yeah, I certainly think more than 23 combined points will be scored this time around, right? Probably both teams will go for 23 or more points. But, Jim, we appreciate you taking the time. Obviously, everyone, we were joined by Jim Hammett of PantherLair.com. And if you made it this far in the episode, we do appreciate you listening. This is the WVSports.com podcast.